That's still good. Hi, I'm Dave, and this is Dave's Weird Project. Today I'm going to discuss Dungeons, Dragons, and other RPGs. RPG stands for Role-Playing Game. If you already know what a role-playing game is, you might want to skip ahead past all the stuff where I talk about what a role-playing game is. A high-level view of RPGs is that they're kind of organized make-believe that you play with other people. When I say organized, I mean that they involve a set of rules and values assigned to concepts like strength and speed and specific skills like treating the wounded. Now, there's nothing wrong with good old-fashioned make-believe. It can be a powerful tool that inspires us to try new things, build new stuff. But for a game, it can be a little too free-form. Check out this documentary footage of totally real people trying to play straight-up make-believe as a game.
I attack you with my sword of ultimate stabbing, cutting, and not missing. My shield is enchanted with magic that prevents any attack from hitting me. But this is the ultimate sword of not missing, so I have to hit. The energy projected by my shield prevents you from even swinging your sword. Well, I use my telepathy to summon a massive dragon that surprises you and catches you in its jaws. If you'll recall, my shield is enchanted by...
Man, shut up, I'm going home. Tragic. Without boundaries and structures, the game quickly becomes a race to make the most ridiculously powerful move, and before long, nobody's having any fun. Kind of like the Star Wars movies after 1981. Don't even get me started on... How many Death Stars do we have to blow up before we finally try something? Okay, I'm okay. Where was I? Rules, right. Having the storytelling built on a scaffolding of rules ensures everybody gets to contribute to the story in a balanced way. The characters they play have strengths and weaknesses, a contrast that is essential for good storytelling. But what's a character? In a role-playing game, each player has one character that they portray, literally playing the role of that character. Their character has rules that apply to them and values assigned to their strengths and abilities and other attributes. It's also encouraged to come up with some kind of story for your character, usually called backstory. Who they are, where they came from, how they got involved in the story that's taking place in the game. Once you have your character, and so do a few of your friends, you're ready to set out on some kind of adventure together in the story of the game. Except one player has to do some extra work. They're called the Game Master, or the Dungeon Master in the case of Dungeons & Dragons. Broadly speaking, the Game Master, or GM, facilitates the game for everyone else. They usually pick the story and guide the players through it. This involves telling them about what's happening in the world and what kind of people, or monsters, their characters encounter. They also decide how the people in the world react to what the characters do. If a fight breaks out, a pretend fight in the game, not a literal fight at the table, the GM acts as a kind of referee, adjudicating what happens because of the player's actions and deciding what the antagonists do in response. You might be wondering how that works. If a player decides to attack a dragon, does it just happen? How does the GM decide if the player slays the dragon and is victorious? That's where chance comes in. Every RPG I've ever encountered is heavily impacted by elements of random chance. This is usually through the use of dice. If you're unfamiliar with the hobby, then when I say dice, you might think of a cube with little dots on it, 1 through 6. This is a 6-sided die, or D6 in typical RPG terms, and it's capable of producing a random number between 1 and 6. Put in terms of probability, each side has a 1 in 6 chance of coming up, roughly 16%. D6s are definitely used in RPGs, and were often the only thing used in the early years, but there are other kinds that produce different probabilities. A 4-sided die is usually the smallest. Its chances are broken down into 1 through 4, 25%. There are also D8s, D10s, D12s, and D20s. The D20 is a kind of sacred relic among D&D players because it's used to determine success or failure of a given action. Back to our player attacking the dragon. The player will typically roll some dice, Compare the result to a target number that the GM has set for the dragon. If the roll is better than the target, the player hits. So is the dragon dead yet? Maybe. Remember when I talked about numbers getting assigned to various attributes? One of those is usually some measurement of how much damage a character or monster can take before they succumb to their wounds. This might be called wounds, life, hit points. It depends on the game. When the player hits the dragon, then they determine how much damage gets done. This is usually with more dice. The damage gets recorded somewhere on the dragon's information, and if it's enough, the GM will declare that the dragon is defeated. This can also happen to the player's characters too. Dragons don't just sit around like piñatas waiting to get the treasure knocked out of them. Sometimes a character can even get taken out of the game entirely. If the characters survive their adventure, they'll be rewarded with treasure of some kind, like gold, gems, art, and other valuable items. This is usually all just converted into spending power. The variation is to add flavor. It's more interesting if the bandits have 16 flawless rubies and a golden chalice with pearl inlays than a sack of gold pieces. There can also be special equipment or weapons adding to the character's power. It's always great when you find the ultimate sword of cutting and not missing. Most importantly, there's an accounting of what the characters learned along the way. Every game I've ever played or read about has a core mechanism of advancement for the characters, usually called experience or XP. Progressing means improving old abilities and unlocking new ones. So the more they go out and have adventures, the better they get at going out and having more adventures. This is all a rough overview of role-playing games in general. Different games have different rules and systems, so in describing them broadly, some things end up a little vague. There are a lot of different games available. I mean a lot. Some don't even use dice. They might use a standard deck of playing cards, or a special deck made just for that game. There's even one that uses Jenga as the random element, meaning everything succeeds until somebody knocks the towers over and then things stop succeeding. Hopefully I've given you a rough idea of what an RPG is. If you want to learn more, I'm going to have Terry put some stuff in the description. There are so many games out there I can't possibly list them all, but rest assured that if you find one you're interested in, there's going to be a video about it, probably several, and tons of other information to help get you started. There's also a lot to be said about where these games came from, their history, and how they've grown. There are plenty of other books and videos out there that cover that, and I think they're going to do a better job at that than I could. It's pretty interesting stuff, actually. What I want to talk about next is my history with them and why I enjoy them. First, a quick word from our sponsors. I don't have any. I'm just starting out, so the best way to support the channel right now is to hit all those important buttons, like, share, subscribe, down there somewhere. Please only do that if you enjoyed this. Also, I wrote a book a few years ago. Terry will put a link down there. I guess if you want to, you could get that. It's cheap on Amazon for the e-reader thing. I don't know. Whatever you want to do. Okay. Even though D&D is kind of synonymous with tabletop RPGs and has been for almost 50 years, I didn't actually play it until the late 2000s. My RPG journey started back in the early 90s, when I looked something like this. There are two games that form my earliest experience with RPGs, and I honestly can't remember which one came first. One was a game called Champions by a company called Hero Games. It's a comic book style superhero game, and you could make just about any kind of hero you could imagine in it. There was a group that played at a bookstore not too far from my house called Palladium Books. A mentor put me in touch with them when I expressed an interest in trying games like this. I only played a couple of times back then. I remember my character was a mob hitman that had died and been sent back to start playing for the good team. He had some kind of animal communication powers, really excellent driving skills, and a limitation that he couldn't kill anybody. That's one of the things I really liked about the champion system, is characters could get more powers by taking on limitations and disadvantages. I don't remember a lot about how those games went, but there is one scene that stuck with me. Shortly after being sent back to Earth, I went into a gun store and I asked the proprietor for a shotgun and buckshot shells. Then I felt a rap on the back of my head and turned around, and there was a man there who was ordering the guy behind the counter to only give me rock salt shells. This was a kind of divine minder run by the GM who was there to make sure I didn't break the terms of my new employment. Now, did you hear what just happened there? I talked about that event like it actually happened, and it was actually me that it was happening to. That's one of the beautiful parts of these games. The memories of these adventures feel real, and you carry them with you. Anyway, Champions was fun, but I didn't play for very long. It might have had something to do with my mom not being thrilled that I was going and hanging out with a bunch of fully adult men in the back room of a bookstore. The other game I found around this time is called Rifts, by a company called Palladium Books. Rifts is bonkers, but in the best possible way. It takes place on a future Earth long after an apocalyptic nuclear war has killed almost everybody. The energy of all that death and destruction tore literal holes in the fabric of the universe, hence the name of the game. These rifts led to other dimensions, so the Earth was flooded with all kinds of new creatures. If I'm butchering the lore here, it's because I haven't looked at it in years, but at the time it fascinated me. I mean, war-ravaged Earth, superpowered humans and monsters, massively powerful technology. It's perfect for a nerdy middle school kid, right? The setting is so rich, and Palladium published dozens of supplementary books, always expanding the overall story and dialing into specific places on Earth and how they had adapted since the Great Cataclysm. For about 15 years, Rifts was the end-all be-all of RPGs for me. I'm not sure I ever actually played it. I did try to get campaigns going several times. A campaign is a series of adventures connected together, telling a longer story, giving the players lots of time to advance their characters. So yeah, I was a game master maybe half a dozen times for it, and always trying to make a campaign last. They usually petered out after 3 or 4 sessions. So why was Rifts such a big influence on me? I think it was because it was so big, and yet there was so much room to build in it. There was all this amazingly detailed story about every corner in the world, so I always felt really grounded when I was trying to make up my own adventures. The options for the players were pretty vast as well. Hundreds, maybe thousands of pieces of equipment, magic spells, psychic powers, cybernetic implants, magic tattoos, symbiotic organisms that gave you enhanced abilities, flying motorcycles, giant robots, and power armor. Oh, the power armor. So many kinds of cool high-tech power armor. So if it was so great, why did I never play it all that much? It was a combination of factors. First, back then RPGs were still pretty stigmatized. There was a whole branch of the population that thought they were satanic in origin, and most of the rest of the people thought they were just nerdy, which was in itself kind of a stigma. Next point, for a long time I suffered from a condition some of you may be familiar with called perfectionism. If I couldn't get something right, or it didn't go quite the way I was hoping, I tended to give up on it. I've since learned that with some things, a lot of things, you have to learn to just kind of let go and try again. But back then, we'd play a few games, it would start to get kind of tedious and difficult, and we, whoever I was playing with, would all just kind of quit. I have no doubt that there are plenty of people out there who wouldn't quit. The longevity of RPGs, the fact that they're still around, is proof of that. I just wasn't one of those people back then. The last reason I had trouble goes back to that aspect of tedium and difficulty that I talked about. As fantastical and magical as I'm making these games sound, there's a lot of bookkeeping involved. Back then we did everything on paper. There's a lot to keep track of, and the GM had most of that. A player has to keep track of their one character and all their stuff. The GM has to keep track of dozens of characters and a lot of other stuff too. What's around the next corner? What's in this box? What's in that abandoned truck? When I was trying to be a GM for Rifts, I thought I had to have all of that stuff figured out ahead of time. Spoiler alert, you don't have to have all that stuff figured out ahead of time. So the weight of all that tracking and pre-planning got to me. Let's fast forward 20 years or so. A friend of mine suggested I try Dungeons & Dragons. He would run it, and I would play along with his then girlfriend, now wife, another friend of theirs, and my very patient, very loving wife. I remember being pretty excited. We played a few sessions, and it was a lot of fun. Then life got in the way. Their friend had some personal stuff, and it was hard for us to commit with little kids running around. But I'd finally gotten to really play an RPG, and it was good. A few years later, the same friend invited me to the group he'd been playing with every other Saturday for years. I jumped at the chance, and I've been playing ever since. It's been like 7 years now. I've even run a few campaigns myself. What changed? How did I finally make it work? I think for me, I had to play for a while, a good long while, with an experienced GM. Being able to see how something is done by someone who knows what they're doing is huge for how I learn stuff. The level of improvisation involved took me completely by surprise, and I really started to loosen up on this idea that I have to have the entire universe and every possibility in it all figured out and documented ahead of time. I still fall into that sometimes, though. Another important shift is the prevalence of computers and the internet. The sheer volume of information and guidance available right now just wasn't there 25 years ago. There are also a lot of pretty good software solutions to helping you run the game. So all of that tedium and bookkeeping of combat, things like that, has gotten a lot more manageable. It's much easier to focus on role-playing and story and fun. There's some veteran players out there that'll probably chuckle at this. In fact, I think I play with 2 of them. You know who you are. I love you guys. Okay, I've told you roughly what role-playing games are and a sketch of how I got involved with them. What's the big deal, though? What's so amazing about these games that I go through all this trouble to tell you about them? Simply put, I think RPGs are an incredibly effective way to bring out the creative force within all of us, even you. They're games about creative thinking, problem solving, and teamwork. They're about exploration and heroism. They're about looking deep within yourself and finding your voices. Yes, voices, plural. They're about creating memories unlike anything else. Sound good? They work pretty well for me. Currently, I play D&D 5th edition. There are a lot of others I'd like to explore as well, like Genesys from Fantasy Flight Games and Savage Worlds from Pinnacle Entertainment Group. I might make some more videos about them later. Stay tuned. If you're interested in finding out more and maybe getting started playing, I recommend D&D. It's by far the most popular and most widely supported system. It should be pretty easy to get started. It's quick to learn. The biggest obstacle right now is COVID-19, which makes playing in person kind of scary. Worry not, there are lots of ways available online to play. I'll get Terry to put some links down in the thing to help you find your way. So, that's my pitch. If I've managed to communicate even a fraction of the joy that RPGs have brought me, then I'll consider this a success. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the comments. I'd also love to hear your RPG memories. And if you have any ideas for future topics, I'd love to hear those too. Until next time, take care everybody.